Top jockey Declan Murphy is remembered for great wins such as the Queen Mother Champion Chase, the Mackeson Gold Cup and 2 Irish Champion Hurdles. However, a terrible accident at Haydock Park racecourse on May Day in 1994 has meant life-changing circumstances for him. Now, it's taken Declan 23 years to commit his story to paper with the invaluable help of co-author Ami Rao. And the book, which is Centaur, published by Doubleday, is a bestseller. It's available from good booksellers and Amazon. And an ideal gift indeed for Father's Day. I'm pleased to welcome online the man himself, Declan Murphy. Declan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Jerry.
Declan, we'll hear your extraordinary story. It's quite literally one of your life hanging in the balance. But first, I'd like to take you back to what shaped you. I believe you grew up in a happy family in the village of Hospital in County Limerick with your siblings and your parents. No doubt a carefree sort of childhood of the 1960s and 70s. Did ponies and horses feature in that?
Yes, it was an idyllic childhood in the early 70s and into the early 80s. We had access to ponies in the little village where I came from in Hospital in the same way as kids in other countries have access to bicycles, I guess. And it was just a natural progression from learning to walk to just getting on a pony and riding.
Right. Now, although you saw riding as just part-time, nevertheless, you were actually a champion amateur while still doing your leaving cert. And the Kildare-based trainer Kevin Prendergast urged you to get your licence. However, someone else was to have a major influence, and Kevin was quite concerned for you. Who was that man and why were the dire warnings?
Well, that man extraordinary was Barney Curley. And I had been leading amateur while I was doing my leaving cert at school. And I was getting the attention of a lot of people. I had seen Barney Curley on the Late Late Show, which had been presented by Gay Byrne. Barney Curley had been on the Late Late Show having raffled his mansion. He was renowned as being this hugely successful gambler. But what really intrigued me about the man was that he did everything keeping his own counsel. He was a person that just seemed to have a mind set apart from others that I had experienced. And suddenly this man wanted to meet me. And of course, I was as curious about to meeting him as he was interested in meeting me. When I did go to meet him on the doorsteps of his mansion in Mullingar, I went there with absolutely no intention of ever being a jockey. And I left there 3 hours later, having sat with him for 3 hours, with my life changed. And he was moving to England with all his horses, and I was going to move to England and ride his horses for him.
Wow. Now,
so that was quite an impacting moment.
Indeed. Now, you did follow, as you say, Barney Curley to England. Now, you also spent time in America where you combined riding with university studies and fell in love with Joanna, who was to be significant in your life. So was it your competitive streak that made you reject plans to be a lawyer and turn to as a professional jockey?
It was a very interesting situation, an interesting time, because I was leading amateur. I remained to be an amateur in the UK, and I went to California, and I went to study at UCLA, and I rode track work at Hollywood Park and Santa Anita and Del Mar to basically fund my education. And I combined this with riding as an amateur, flying over and back to England. And suddenly then, a couple of years later, with 1 year to do at the law school, I met a girl, and that girl was Joanna, and she was to have a huge influence on the decisions that I would make from that point on. And that kept me in England for that moment in time. And then, just at that same time, Josh Gifford offered me the job as first jockey. And I decided to take a couple of years out and just ride for fun. And I went to the top, riding for fun, treating it as a hobby, which was quite an extraordinary set of events, really.
Indeed. Now, you had many memorable wins and 60 winners in 1993-94 season. Now, potentially you may have had 10 or more years of racing at the top ahead. However, you felt uneasy going into Haydock Park on the day of your near-fatal accident because the world of sport was mourning two top sportsmen. Do you recall all of that?
Well, I was a huge fan of Ayrton Senna, and Ayrton Senna lost his life at Imola the day before I had my accident. And I arrived to the races on the day of my accident, having a chat with Charlie Swan in the weighing room, and by all accounts, we were deeply troubled by the death of Senna. Such a brilliant sports person, you never imagine your heroes getting killed in action. And it highlighted our own awareness to our own mortality, which was a very strange event to happen when you're just going out to ride in what was going to be the last big race of the season. And I had ridden the winner of most of the big races that season. So I would have gone there with great expectations, yet having my awareness highlighted to my own mortality just in the day before and the night before. There's a brilliant chapter in my book Centaur coming from the voice of my then girlfriend Joanna, and she has told my writer Ami Rao how I had great misgivings about everything that day going to the races, and but yet when I would have gone out to ride in the race, I would have been completely focused and ready to win the last big race of the season.
Indeed. Now, that niggling worry definitely proved telling. You were on the favourite, and the commentator, a man you admired, Peter O'Sullivan, was actually calling you home. Describe your distinctive riding style. How did the fall occur, and Charlie Swan's dilemma?
Well, it's quite extraordinary. I had developed at this point, I was at the top of my profession, and I had developed quite a distinctive style of riding. I would ride a race to suit my horse. I would get into a perfect rhythm with my horse's stride pattern. I would always find the horse's cruising speed, and I would only ever release that horse or change gear on that horse from their cruising speed when I knew I got them to a point of where they could take me all the way past the winning post. I had done this very effectively on the favourite Arcot that day, and I was travelling into the straight with 2 hurdles to jump, and I was in a position of winning this race. And Peter O'Sullivan, in his distinctive voice, said, "And here comes Declan Murphy delivering Arcot just with a perfectly timed run." And just at that moment, I would have sensed just a change in the dynamic, that Arcot was not travelling as well as I wanted him to. I had carried him to that point of the race in his cruising speed, and then I had just let out just a quarter of an inch of rein just to encourage him to just lengthen his stride, and he lengthened it. And having jumped the second last hurdle, on the approach to the last hurdle, I realized 2 things. That one, the stride that he was in was too long to meet the last hurdle and jump it economically. So I made a tactical move to shorten that stride, to get him on a stride that when he would get to the hurdle, he would have 2 strides to jump it as opposed to 1. When we got to the hurdle, I had done this, measured it perfectly, and I had communicated this to my horse, I assumed, in a complete trust. But when we got to the hurdle, just in a moment of what could be seen as madness on the horse's part, it could be seen as a moment of mistrust, he took a leap, a stride too soon. And in the hyperextension of his body, he clipped the top of the hurdle, and he shattered his pelvis in takeoff, and his head flung back just as I was being propelled forward with the momentum of the stride. and my head collided with his head, knocking me unconscious when I hit the ground. So when I hit the ground, I lay there prone. And then Charlie Swan is coming behind me on the horse he's riding. My horse is stricken on one side and I lay prone on the other. And Charlie is doing everything on his horse to avoid me on the ground. But instinct screamed within the horse that he was riding to swerve the larger of the two obstacles and try to jump me, being the smaller obstacle, laying prone on the ground. And in his failed attempt to execute this leap, Charlie Swan's horse landed on my head, shattering my skull in 12 places, leaving me with 2 blood clots and leaving me practically dead on the ground.